I lived in a small apartment when I was in my early 20s because I didn't have much money at that time. Since I lived alone, there was no one to share a larger apartment with. The building was small, with a total of 6 apartments. Most of the people in the building were retirees who didn't like to socialize much. To be honest, I liked the fact that I didn't have to interact with someone every time I entered or left the building. I'm usually in a hurry and rarely in the mood to socialize. I lived on the top floor, and across from my apartment there was an elderly couple who lived there for almost 2 years until they moved. I never spoke to them, so I didn't really care when they moved, to be honest. Several months passed and a new person moved into the front apartment. It took another 2 weeks before I met my new neighbor. I was getting ready for work one morning, preparing my lunch, when suddenly I heard the neighbor's door open. I didn't pay much attention to it until another minute passed and I realized I hadn't heard the door close. I finished getting ready, put on my shoes, and then opened my door to leave. Immediately I noticed that the neighbor's door was still open, and a tall man in his 50s was standing in front of the door, staring at me. He smiled and introduced himself. I gave a fake smile and told him my name. Then I said I had to go to work and started walking away. But as soon as I reached the staircase, he invited me to have breakfast with him. This was very strange, considering I had just told him I had to go to work. I politely excused myself and continued walking. While at work that day, I kept thinking about how strange that interaction had been. Fortunately, when I got home after work, I managed to get into my apartment without having to talk to anyone. But the next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. I was very annoyed because I had work later and now I had woken up too early, but I quickly put on my clothes and walked to the front door. My neighbor was there again, but strangely, he was standing right in front of his open door again, just like he had done the day before. He invited me again to have breakfast in his apartment. I obviously declined, and this time I told him more forcefully not to knock on my door so early. The man didn't seem to like my response, and he stood there staring. Then he said that because of the earlier time, I didn't have to go to work yet, so I had enough time to have breakfast with him. I knew something was wrong with this man, as that response was very odd. I firmly declined his invitation, went back inside and closed my door. And I made sure it was locked. Again, the more I thought about this man, the stranger and more unsettling this interaction seemed. Despite that strange morning, the rest of the day passed normally. I got home at 6 p.m., prepared my dinner, watched a movie, and got ready for bed at 11 p.m. I lay in bed for a while thinking about my weird neighbor. I pondered what I should do in that situation and made a decision. I decided that if anything else strange happened, I would complain to the building owner. So I turned off my bedside lamp and tried to sleep. But a few minutes later, I heard my neighbor's door open. I waited silently, trying to hear what my neighbor was doing. But I couldn't hear anything. Again, I didn't hear his door close. I was nervous, not knowing what that man could be doing so late at night. However, I eventually fell asleep since I didn't hear any other noises for an entire hour. I don't know how long I slept before a loud knock on my door woke me up. But these knocks weren't coming from my front door. They were coming from my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, completely scared. Then I turned on my bedside lamp. The only thing I could use to defend myself was a small screwdriver on the table next to my bed. I grabbed the screwdriver and stood by my bed trembling in fear. Then I grabbed my phone to call the police. When the police arrived at my front door, I quickly left my room and opened the door for them. I was surprised that the front door wasn't even closed, but I told the police everything. I told them about my suspicions of my neighbor. Unfortunately, there was no evidence to prove that my neighbor had invaded my apartment, and the police couldn't do anything. Regardless, I knew what I had heard was real. and I didn't feel safe in my apartment anymore. I called my sister that day, and she let me stay at her apartment for a few days. Unfortunately, those days passed too quickly. So I started driving back to my apartment on a Saturday night. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that my neighbor had surely given up at that point, and everything would be fine. I parked my car and started walking towards my building. The sun had just set, so the stairs were dark. I climbed the stairs slowly, trying not to alert my neighbor that I had returned. When I reached my floor, I saw that my neighbor's door was closed, and I felt relieved. I quickly crossed my door and locked it. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway, turned on the lights, and as I turned the corner into my hallway towards my room, I screamed and jumped back because the man was sitting right on my couch, staring directly at me with a wide, creepy smile. I ran out of the building and got into my car. Then I called the police again and waited for them in a parking lot near my building. When the police arrived, 10 minutes later, we went to my building and they entered the apartment while I waited near my car. To my surprise, they came back a few minutes later with the man in handcuffs. They told me that the man was still sitting on my couch and they had found a small knife in his pocket. But the most disturbing part of the whole situation was the man admitting to the police that he had invaded my apartment 3 times, and I was only aware of 2 times he had invaded. This means that at some point, the man was hiding in my apartment, watching me without me knowing of his presence. In the video description, there are links to horror and thriller books in case you want to buy. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.